Welcome, everybody, and good morning. My name is Mike Walsh, and I am with CSBA, the Director of County Board Services. So today we're kicking off our 5-part series on the County Board Governance Handbook, Bridging Policy and Practice. The goal today is to provide you with an understanding of how to use the handbook as a tool to improve your board's governance. But first, before I bring in the two guests who have volunteered to join me today, I'm excited to get to them. That's why I'm stumbling around right now. I want to get to those folks, but there's always that housekeeping, right? So first, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. As a matter of fact, for those of you who are joining us, eventually we're going to place a survey on the screen for you. It's a 2-question survey. We're going to ask you to give some information along that lines as well. What we'll ask you to do is, if you plan to join us and you have a question for us, what we're going to do is we're going to ask that you keep an eye on the Q&A feature to submit those questions. And then we'll create time near the end of our webinar to check into those, and we may not get to answer all of them, but we're going to do our best to answer them. All right. Also, we'll be keeping an eye on those things. So the goal is simple. We want to make this more of a conversation and less of a lecture. So we want to hear from you, and that's why we're going to use the survey as well as the questions. I am joined today by 2 gentlemen that over the years I have developed a deep respect for their work in education. Dr. Charles Weiss, whom I refer to as Chuck, and Christopher Maricle. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment, and they can tell you about their backgrounds. But first, I need to help you understand some things about both of these gentlemen. As you can see, Chuck is a governance consultant. I've mentioned before that he is a governance consultant extraordinaire, and you're going to find out why in just a moment. And Christopher Maricle is the Director of Training here at CSBA. And so, gentlemen, I'm going to breathe for a second, and I want to bring you into this conversation and let everybody know who you are. So if you can just get us started, and Chuck, we'll start with you, but tell us a little bit about you, your background, because you've been in a few of these worlds where you've been a superintendent, you've been a board member, you're a professor. I don't know when you have time to sleep, but Chuck, if you could, just tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me here. So I've been working in education for 50 years this year. I'm currently serving as a board member, and I previously served as an educational leader in a variety of settings. And I'm also currently a full-time professor in educational leadership at Cal State Channel Islands. So I'll tell you a bit about each of those roles. I'm going to go into that now, Mike.
Yes, please. Absolutely.
I was elected to the Hueneme School District Board of Trustees in 2014. I served as president and vice president, all the roles there. Our district is a relatively small district, 11 schools serving 7,000 preschool through 8th grade students. We have approximately 82% of our students live in poverty, about 75% are Hispanic, 8% white, 3% Filipino, 1% Black, and 42% are English learners. Over a quarter of our parents work in agriculture here in Ventura County, and a significant number of families are employed at the Naval Base Ventura County and the Port of Hueneme. The Naval Base is a huge employer here. You probably don't know much about it, except that you probably know that Naval Base Ventura County is where the president lands when they come to visit Los Angeles because LAX is too crowded.
I agree.
Before becoming a board member, I worked in educational administration for 39 years. I started as a school psychologist. I was a special ed director, elementary and high school principal, assistant superintendent, and 19 years of my 39 years as a county superintendent of schools from 93 to 2012. I have actually 22 years working in county offices starting in 1990.
So the only thing you haven't listed so far is bus driver.
I don't have a license to do that. Otherwise, I probably would have had to do it. I worked both as an elected county superintendent in Ventura County that has about 135,000 students in 21 school districts. And I worked as an appointed county superintendent in Santa Clara County that's about twice that size, 235,000 students in 31 school districts. I also was president of the California County Superintendents Association for a year. I'm currently in my 11th year as a tenured professor at California State University Channel Islands, and I serve as chair of the Department of Educational Leadership. I teach in the doctoral program and the master's program for educational leaders. And I'm in my 5th year as a master's in governance faculty member with CSBA. And my perspectives that I'll share today are based on all those different roles I've had.
Perfect. I think you're going to carry most of this conversation today. I'm going to do what I usually do when you're talking. I'm going to take notes and learn. Christopher, you are here with us as well. Look, you're your life didn't start at CSBA. You had an educational life prior, and then you were here at CSBA, left for a short while, and then decided, no, you missed me, I'm assuming, and decided you had to come back. And so I'm just thrilled that you're here. So if you could give us a little background, walk us kind of through your journey as Chuck just did.
Well, good morning to you both, and thank you for having me here. I got a degree in psychology from Sac State in 1986, and a degree in psychology in 1986 and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. So I was looking around for things to do, and I ran into my former Catholic school principal, and she said, "Christopher, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm working at this home for emotionally disturbed boys, but I don't think that's going to be me. I just don't know." And she said, "Well, I think you should be a teacher." And I said, "No, no, that is not me. I'm not cut out to be a teacher." But I thought about it, and so I applied, and I was a 5th grade teacher for 4 years, and I taught 8th grade for a year, and then somewhere in there, I decided I should go get a master's in education leadership. And then I was a Catholic school principal for 10 years at 3 different schools in California and Nevada, and then I served as the assistant superintendent for the Diocese of Stockton with about 5,000 students, 12 elementary schools and 2 high schools, and in charge of teacher professional development and accreditation and testing and stuff like that. And then in 2006, one of our former colleagues called and said, "Hey, there's this thing. I think, we've been talking about your career, and I think you'd like it." I said, "Okay, what is it?" She said, "That's a governance consultant." I said, "Sure." So I joined. And so starting in 2006, I started doing a lot of travel, and I spent several years working with I think I served over 75 districts or county offices, working on a wide range of issues, mostly around good governance practice, a lot of superintendent evaluation, board self-evaluation, goals, some strategic planning, some community work, in facilitating community conversations. And in that time, I also was able to help develop the board self-evaluation tool that CSBA offers to its members. And I was the primary author on Call to Order when it first came out. And then in 2016, I felt the need to go find out if I could work at a higher level. And so I accepted the role of executive director for Head Start California. And so I worked with that nonprofit association, working directly with their board of directors for about 6.5 years, working on bylaws, governance procedures, elections, protocols, in addition to running the organization and all the things that go with it. I did that about 6.5 years. Then I in 2023, I actually went to the California Department of Ed, and I worked in the School and Facilities Transportation Services Division, where our unit was responsible for preparing for the State Board of Education all of the waiver requests and some of the proposals for district unification, which is a very long process with a great deal of analysis. And we spent over a year on some of that work, getting it ready for the state board. And then in May, I had the opportunity to, not many people get to do it, right? They say you can't go home again. But in May, I saw the position and I said, you know what? I actually really enjoyed my work at CSBA, and I felt like it was coming home. So I returned as the director of training, and it's been a pleasure to find you again and reconnect with this community. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And obviously, there's a ton of knowledge between the two of you. And I'm excited to just keep mining a lot of that gold, as Susan Scott likes to talk about in Fierce Conversations. The gold is when you mine deep into the conversations. And so today, the three of us have agreed that we're going to solve the world's problems. And we don't know if anyone's going to listen and believe us, but we're going to solve the world's problems today. So I'm going to turn for just a second to the audience. Those of you who are joining us online right now, you've gotten to know a little bit about the background for these two gentlemen. And so Che, I'm going to refer to producer Che every now and then. Producer Che Munoz is in the building with me. And his job is to make sure that we actually stay focused. And he's got a lot of work to do today. So Che, if you go ahead and place that survey up there for the good folks so that they know what we'd love to find out about you. So ladies and gentlemen, you'll see a survey right now, and just 2 quick questions. And we're just going to ask you to vote tell us how long you have been on your county board. And also, we want to know a little bit about study sessions. Now, this is a foreshadowing. We're kind of letting you know where we're going with all of this. We're going to be talking a little bit about study sessions and how to use them. So, but right now, what we'd love to know is how long have you served on the board? You've heard that Chuck has been around since Moses was a crossing guard and was in schools. And so your number is somewhere up there. And then we'll also talk again about how often do you hold study sessions, never once a year, etc. So, and producer Che, you can leave those up as long as you need or take them down. I am going to go ahead and while we're getting that information, what I am going to do is before we dive into the handbook. So obviously this conversation is about the brand new handbook. I'm excited that we were able to write that. And we debuted it at the most recent county board conference in the fall back in Monterey in September. And this is really a chance for us to help folks understand, okay, great, you've got a book. What do I get to do with that? And it's about professional development. But before we get into the book, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about professional development and why that matters. And so now I'll start with you, Chuck, and I'm going to say we're not talking about people who've just been hired for a job, right? We're talking about people who have been elected. And in many cases, we're going to be giving guidance. These are folks who are going to be giving guidance to an organization that they may or may not have an experience of. They may or may not know that in many cases, the county Office of Education is the biggest employer in the county, right? And that we're talking about millions of dollars in budgets, and we're talking about working with specific students and whether or not I know anything about them. So given that this is not about, this is an elected person, and we're talking about the importance of professional development, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, again, from your experience, why do we need to have a conversation about professional development to even begin with? I got elected. Why do I need to know more?
Well, yeah, and why indeed? Because we've all been students, so we know what education is, right? The reality is that when you get elected to a position in education, there's so much to learn. And no matter what your prior role has been, I've worked with county board members that have been teachers, that have been administrators, that have never been involved in education at all, except being a student and having possibly students, their children as students. But every role, every leadership role that we have, I believe that leaders need to continue to learn and grow to better serve whatever purpose they're there. So in our case, as county board members, it's to serve the students and our constituents that elected us. Public education has been around for 100 years. County offices have been around for less than that. And yet county superintendents have been around since 1852. That's been the county office, but boards have only been around since, I don't know what year it was, but it was like in the 70s, I think. So public education has been around, but county boards have not. But all of our schools, both the ones we operate directly as county board members and the ones that we serve in our districts, are in a context of a social, cultural, political, economic, and legal pressures that affect the schools and the families and the students we serve. And those things change all the time. And incidents that have happened anywhere in the U.S. can sometimes have effects on our own local county. And we need to be ready to answer to them. And so, the school shootings that go on, those affect us even though it didn't happen in our county. So we have to learn from one another for those who've had experience with these things and have yet to have those things happen in our county so we can be ready for them. And I think that's what professional development is all about. It's about making better decisions for effective governance about things that we may never have personally experienced. And also the other thing about professional development in county offices is the education code is the largest code in California. It has the most volumes, and there's no one that I know, maybe a few people I know, that actually know everything in every one of those codes. We can't expect board members to know all those things, but there are directions that guide us as county board members and as county superintendents to make better decisions. And it's important for us to keep up with that. I don't know if you all know this too, but about 250 bills a year are proposed in education. And about somewhere between 75 and 100 of those actually get passed. And so every year in January, when those new bills go into place, we need to know about them because they can affect what we do. So the bottom line in all this rambling I've done, is that education has been around a long time, but it continues to change. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be trained in that. We need to be educated in that so that we make good decisions for the students that we serve. And in county offices, we serve the most needy students in the county, and we need to make sure we're doing a good job for them.
So what I'm hearing is there's a whole lot to learn, and as fast as you learn it, it changes. So you got to learn it again. Right?
Beautifully stated. I could have said much quicker, Mike.
Take your time. We got time to fill. It's okay. So Christopher, your take on that as well. Ongoing professional development for county board members. Any specific advice you'd give if there were a new county board member versus a veteran, a seasoned one, someone who's been around? Because I'm going to pull the results of that slide up in just a second. But first, let's hear from you.
Well, so I'm gonna do the shorthand thing and say, first of all, what Chuck said is true. So that was good. That's all. I agree with everything Chuck said. I think the only thing I would add, and you mentioned being newly elected, and I think newly elected board members often come with the freshest perspective they have is the role of representation, right? So they run for office, they're talking to the community, they're expressing what they want, and they're finding what the community wants, and so they often come to the board focused on this role of representation, and that's an important role, and that's why they're elected. But there's other roles, right? And so what can be in conflict with what the community wants is their fiduciary role, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility to pass a budget, keep the county Office of Education solvent and healthy. There's also the instrumental role, right? They have to make sure that they operate within the law. And so then there's the what's best for kids, right? The educational, the purpose, the fundamental purpose of the county office is a field of study in which the board member may have no experience. And so, and I think the handbook lays this out very well. Understanding those roles, what does the community want? What can we afford to do? What are we legally obligated to do? And what should we do? What's best for kids? Balancing those four things requires a truckload of study to understand how to make decisions in a complex system. So I think for all the reasons that Chuck articulated, it takes a long time to learn those roles and how you apply them as a governance team in making decisions that's best for kids.
And see, I think everything that both of you are saying, I've been living this. I'm in my fourth term here, one more lap, if you will. And I'm still learning things that are different from what I thought I knew when I got elected back in 2010. So it's an ongoing thing. And so Che, could you go ahead and put the results of that survey up for us? I wanted to take a quick look. So do you have the survey results? If we have them, there we go. So the question about how long have you served on a board, and we're looking at this one, and the majority of our audience is landing in that 0 to 2 year window. Thankful, all right, because there's a lot of turnover that's going on right now. So all the advice that we're given as we have this conversation, right off the bat, look at the number of folks who are in their first 2 years, and I can understand why they'd be willing to come hang out with us. All right, but we also have a lot of good conversation for those who've been doing this for a while, such as myself. So let's also, as we look at this, let me see if I can get my scroll up here. And then the notion of study sessions, again, once a year, never. So I'm getting a sense of some of the conversation that we're going to be having here and how it fits. We've got a majority of you are in your first 2 years. Thank you for joining us and thank you for being with us. We're going to do our best not to overwhelm you. We want to make this as simple as possible, even though it's, again, there's a lot of studying to be done later on. But I love that notion. So Che, you had just put up a slide, and if you could put that one back up again. And I think it's important, I think, when we talk about board policy, and I just want to get your opinions from either one of you right now. I want to draw your attention to again, on the slide on the right-hand side, that key takeaways. That if there's anything else, and this is my way of summarizing it, is that key takeaways, knowledge building leads to better board members, better strategic decisions, and all the effective governance, all the things that you just mentioned. So I'm going to just take a hot second and say, so Chris, Chuck, anything you want to add to this slide or anything of importance that you want to point out that I may not have touched just now?
I would add that there's a feeling of joy And we often forget that you should always try to find the joy in something you do. But I think when you're doing something well, there's a feeling of joy. And also, I think there's a feeling of accomplishment that can come when you're an effective board, because then you realize you can assess, okay, what difference have we made this month in our meeting? What difference have we made for this year as leaders of the county office? And I think those are two things that I would add to it. And I don't want people to forget that when you do something, when you dedicate your life to do something, you ought to look for the joy in it, and you ought to look for the purpose and what you're adding to your community.
Love it. Christopher.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of that joy comes from confidence. When you know your stuff, you understand how the board works, you understand the roles, you understand, right? And they're no longer the distraction. The procedures and how we do stuff are known and understood. So we focus all of our effort and our thinking on the things that matter most. That's where the joy is.
Love it. Love it. And I will say that I have had a lot of joy in my role as a board member. So thank you for touching on that. So I'm going to move forward now to the handbook. And so Che, if you could do a favor, go ahead and place that slide of the handbook up here right now, because I want to talk about this. So you've just given a lot of reasons about why the professional development is important. And Chuck, you mentioned something about better serve. So I want to start there and talk a little bit about how the book was written. And as you'll notice right here off to the side, on the right-hand side of the slide, it talks about county offices, and then it talks about the students and programs. Then it talks about funding. And we don't get to board members until section 4. And I thought it was important to point that out because of what you just said, Chuck, about service. What in my mind, what I have found in my background when I was doing board training and working in my own practice, oftentimes it took a while to help folks understand that this notion of service is the calling, and it helps you stay focused, as you were just talking about, Christopher. And so what I wanted to do in this book as we were writing it was really to set out, who are we serving? Right? I think if we keep that in mind, the purpose of the county office, I think if we keep in mind the students and who they are, I think the ability to serve becomes pretty simple. So using the handbook, really, I want to talk about, from your experiences, when you look at how it's laid out, and going back to this conversation about service, how do you see all of those things playing out now? How do you see using the handbook to help me stay focused on the service and all of those things that you both have laid out so well? That, man, there's a lot to understand there. And so we're going to switch it up this time. Christopher, let you go first.
Well, I think what you've done is really important in the handbook, because so in a broad definition of governance, right, not just school governance, but governance in general, right? The governance is the process by which authority, power, decision-making, and accountability are distributed through any system. So it's really important for governing board members to realize, that you're governing for a purpose, and that purpose is an educational purpose, right? So in order to govern it well, you have to understand governance, but even more importantly, perhaps, you need to understand the system that you are governing. And so the handbook really nicely lays out, what is that system? What is the County Office of Education system? How is it organized? What are its responsibilities and authorities? That's what they need to understand, because you can't govern something that you don't understand. And then I will pass the microphone to Chuck.
Well, I think I'll pick up right there. Back in the 90s, when I first became a county superintendent, we would go to Sacramento every 2 years when new legislators were elected. And they would say, why do we need county offices anyway? And every 2 years, we'd be stating that statement over and over again. What is it the county does that helps school districts and the vast majority of children in our county get educated? And so I think, really the way the handbook is written really makes great sense, because it starts with, what is the purpose of county offices? Why do they exist? Why do we spend the money we spend to help save money by having to fund things individually in every district? And why do we have special programs for special students? Because they occur so few in each district, they can't afford to run them. So we bring them together for economy of scale and save the state that kind of money. The funding for county offices follows the students and the services we do. But if people don't see those services out in public, then they don't know what that money's for. I've seen several legislative leaders come in and say, I'm going to save the state millions of dollars by getting rid of all those county offices, and not realizing what things we do, like providing payroll for all the people that work in the county instead of having each district have to do that payroll process. So it's all those economy of scale things that we do that are critically for new board members to understand that they're legislated, that we're here to save money for the state and to create services for kids that otherwise would not be served. And then understanding that there are different roles that the county board plays and the county superintendent plays that are clearly specified not only in the state constitution, but all the legislation that's been written since the state constitution was approved and modified from time to time to say exactly why boards are there, to provide a certain amount of oversight to the county superintendent and specific direction or specific support for constituents for their students. And then why the county superintendents are there, because originally in the Constitution, the county superintendents ran all the schools in the county. There were not districts. And so we've maintained some of those responsibilities while passing others on to the districts. And then also, as the state grew so large, the state superintendent couldn't do all the things they needed for oversight of those districts. So county superintendents are now charged with those. Now, that was a quick oversight of that. But basically, I love the way the handbook is designed because it allows every member of a county board, but also the general public, to look at this and say, why do county offices exist? And what are the checks and balances that make sure that they're effective for the children and the businesses and the parents in our county?
I think you just did an amazing job of explaining that whole concept. I know from time to time I'll see in the newspaper some article, and I'm one of these guys. I probably do something I shouldn't do. I jump right into the comment section, and I know that's bad practice, but I do it anyhow. I'm a glutton. And so one of the things I see oftentimes is exactly what you said, Chuck. People say, well, we just need to save some money to get rid of all county offices. And when I respond with, so do you understand that economy of scales and what they would do? And they typically either disappear or they continue to argue, well, there's no such thing, there's no problem. But you also, I've heard you in the past, you've given a definition. I think it really applies to when we start talking about students and some of the student programs that we offer that we are in support. And often there's this word that's been thrown around lately around equity. And I thought you give a great definition of equity as you walk somebody through that when you were talking about special education students. And I don't know if you recall, we were talking about this in a just random conversation. But I'd love for you to just share that definition of why that equity and why looking at that, and especially that meaning that those are the services that counties provide so often. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that definition again.
Well, I can talk about it from the perspective of my own family. My son is a teacher in the county office of education here in Ventura. He works in the school for severely emotionally disturbed youth. We have 20 districts in Ventura County now, and these kids occur in districts at a very small rate, maybe some districts 1 or 2 children. If we didn't run that school called Phoenix School that my son works in as a teacher, those kids would probably just be incarcerated because they get themselves in trouble all the time because of their emotional disturbance issues. Most of them have actually been kicked out of their homes and they're in foster care now. But if we didn't have the school that he works in, these kids would not have a place to go to school. And some of them do turnarounds as they mature that enable them to be contributing citizens in our county. And that's the kind of thing that county office does. My daughter was born with Down syndrome. And so she also received special education services, but she was in a larger number per school. So she was able to stay in her local schools. But the point of all that I think that you're getting to, Mike, is that we do things that otherwise wouldn't exist. I mean, another example in my county, I'm not sure if this works in every county, but is expelled youth. We have to have a plan for expelled youth because when a district has to expel a student, they don't want to, but all kids need to be in school. That's what the law says. So we have to put them in school somewhere. In our county, the county office runs the program for expelled youth. So all those kids stay in school. It's a high intensity program. Almost all those kids come back to our district where I'm on the board better, resolving some of the issues that got them into trouble, that got them expelled. If the county office didn't exist, I don't know where those kids would end up. So those are kind of personal stories, but I know the numbers are few, but they can have huge impact on a community if we don't do things to help those kids grow, mature, and become successful citizens. In addition to our programs for career technical education, helping kids get a job that otherwise would have quit school and actually become a contributing citizen and taxpayer. Those are programs our county office runs as well. So it really comes down to personal stories about kids that need something different. And Mike said that's equity, and I think it is. Equity is giving kids what they need and giving them things so that they can become productive citizens and contributors to our community. And I think county offices are a leader in that. If we were not there, there would not be that support system.
Well, I think you summed it up really well. One of the things I love are the graduation. I call it graduation season. It's a season, right? And it's for our county office. I think I usually end up attending about 10 to 15 different ceremonies. And when we hear some of the stories of the trauma or their life circumstances that they've overcome, I feel really good. So it goes back to that joy that you mentioned earlier, right? I feel really good because I'm hearing their stories and understanding the work that we did led to some meaningful changes in someone's life. And that's where I get my joy. So I love this notion of as you're having this conversation, that there's a focus. There really is a purpose for county offices, and there really is a specific role for county board members. So I want to shift now. I want to go ahead.
Can I add one more thing before you go? Because it's really important to county board members. County board members actually have the primary responsibility to act as the district board for court and community schools. And so kids that are incarcerated and kids that are expelled, the one group I mentioned, but the incarcerated kids, if we can provide a high quality education program in the juvenile hall, we can reduce that recidivism rate and make sure the kids don't go on to become adult criminals. And I think that's a huge savings. When you think of what it costs to incarcerate an adult for any length of time, it's very expensive. So that's another cost-effective approach that we have that county boards can be very involved in, because we are the boards for the court and community schools.
That is our number one focus. And so well said. Thank you, Chuck, for adding that. So I want to go ahead and move to the next slide, just because as the way the book is laid out, what really shows up next is this conversation about shared governance. So I want to take a second, because this is, I believe, on page 11 in the book. I'm trying to keep track of it. I lost track at this point. But the notion of brokerage and closure, and I want to do this real quickly, kind of set the context, and then I want to get your opinions of why this shared governance is so important when we're talking about, in many cases, electeds and unelected. So, but the notion of closure is just simply the quality of member relationships. So how are we working together? What are the conversations? How well do we get along? Not necessarily do we believe everything exactly the same, but how well do we work through our challenges, our agreements, and come up with norms and protocols? And then the better that is, what they refer to as the higher the sense of closure, what Bert talks about is the higher the level of influence you have outside of the boardroom, which is where I think it's important for us as board members. We're supposed to have influence and the ability to advocate and make things that change things in an impactful way for our students that, Chuck, you just did a great job of outlining. So the point of this is, in my mind, and I don't know where you guys will go with this conversation, but in my mind, the point of shared governance is that if you have it working well, your quality of your team is significantly high and it influences others outside of that team. So whoever wants to go first, just open your mic and just talk a little bit about the importance of this thing, shared governance.
Well, I think the focus on the quality of the relationships, right? I can't remember where this comes from. It might be Susan Scott. Progress is built on relationships, and relationships are built on conversations. And so every conversation with a colleague, with a board member, is an opportunity to either improve or damage a relationship. And so, the importance of having the conversations that allow you to understand each other, so you can respect each other, so you can trust each other, right? That's the sequence. So because if you can do that, if you can reach that, then that's how you get to coherence, when everyone has had enough conversations so that we all understand the words in the same way. We've had the conversations that get us there. When we work with school district boards and county boards, and we help them, we do a governance session, training session, and they develop a handbook. And I always remind them, the handbook you've created is a Word document. That's all it is. And its only value is that it's a record of a conversation you had where you reached clarity. That's the real goal, right? So I think, to me, closure equals clarity. We all understand how we each are thinking about our work and understand our roles. That's my take on it, and I will pass the microphone again to Chuck.
I love that. Closure equals clarity. I wrote that down. I'm gonna harvest that as a saying from now on.
So I think you stated it real well, Chris. I think governance is somewhat more difficult with county boards because of the fact that county boards and county superintendents have different legislative responsibilities. And in a county office, 53 of the county offices in the state of California have elected superintendents and elected board members. But all 58 county boards need to have a thought of a governance team as the board with the superintendent. So if you have 5 board members, then it's a 6-member team. If you have 7 board members, like I had in Santa Clara, it's an 8-member team. But keep in mind that in all those settings, even if you're all elected, you're elected by different constituents. County board members tend to run in board trustee areas, and superintendents run countywide. So you have different but the same constituents, but you have very different legislative rules. There's a whole bunch of things that are in the education code that county superintendents must do that the county board has no authority in, except to give some minimal oversight. There's no voting associated with those things. And so I think it comes down to what Chris was saying. It requires building trust and respect for one another. And that doesn't happen unless you have that communication that Chris talked about. And if you get that trust, respect, and communication, you'll make more impactful decisions for your county and for the school districts in the county and for your own operation. But you have to find time to develop a shared moral purpose as a team. And that doesn't happen by not talking to each other. Yeah, sitting down and saying, what are we here for? What do we want to accomplish? How can we create service out of this office to help all the kids in the county, as well as the kids that we directly teach? And so with that, over the time, you need to develop shared governance agreements on the direction of the county office. I've worked with, when I was president of the County Superintendents Association, we were called into counties where there were county boards and county superintendents disagreeing on almost everything. And what we did is we had them sit down and say, why are you here? What do you want to accomplish? And when they each said that independently, there was a lot of commonality. Then they built on that to decide how they'll work together to reach those things. Because in reality, those of us that decide to run for a county board or a district board or run for county superintendent or be appointed a county superintendent, we have one common thread. We want to make students' educational experiences better and give more opportunities for every student that we teach. And once you get to that level, then you can find all the things that you can respect about one another and trust about one another, and then start to make shared decisions that are good for everybody and the constituents as well. So, Chris, I think you started it off perfectly, and I just tried to add something about how county offices are a little different than on district boards. If you've been on a district board and you move to a county board, you realize it is a little different. The superintendent doesn't actually work directly for you. They work for all the people that elected them. But unless you're an appointed county super, which I was for 4 years, you work for the board. You have a different relationship there. It's more like a district board, but you still have independent authorities to do. So going into training with CSBA to find out about what those differences are and find out what strategies work to make them work effectively is critically important.
So both of you, I want to say, have brought up something that I think is worth, it bears pointing out, and the conversation around team building. And one of the things I often tell folks is team building is not an activity that you do for 5 minutes and then you check it off the list. Team building is the conversation that happens. And the more you can have that conversation about how we are going to be together as we do this work, and that's really what that, as everything you're defining as norms and protocols, et cetera, those are just agreements. And again, it's our willingness to hold each other to those things, how we are being with each other in pursuit of our work for the students. And I love that you define the governance team, not just as the board members, but the board members and the superintendent. That's the governance team working together. So I want to go to a little more practicality around then. Earlier, we asked the question about study sessions. And Chuck, I want to start with you around how do you see study sessions being used? And then Christopher, I want to talk to you about how does this all connect with we've got the MIG conversations, we've got governance consultants. So I want you to talk a little bit about how that part of the system works as well in support. But Chuck, I'd love to start with you in this notion of study sessions. I mean, I get asked all the time especially before I came to CSBA. So when can we have these conversations? Do we do it while the public's in the room? It's a board meeting. Do we have to agenda? All of those things. So if you could take a few minutes and just talk about from your experience, how would you recommend it?
Well, there's two kinds of study sessions that I think are really important. One is when you have an important decision coming up that is complex and you want to get real detail on it. So for example, we often do a study session before the adoption of the budget or the LCAP plan, because those are such complex things, so many pages to look at. Our budgets are almost 200 pages. Our LCAP is 150 pages, loaded with ideas, loaded with concepts that we're committing to when we vote on it. So we do a study session on those. Those are the kind of study sessions that are basically content oriented. The more important study sessions, in my opinion, that make those other study sessions work are the study sessions where you get to know each other. Every time a new member comes on your board, I believe in the adage that says that one new member makes a new board. So anytime we have a new member come on our board, we have a study session, a Saturday study session. And it starts off, we have our board president usually run the session, and each member has a task. But it starts off by having us do these little tasks where you tell us about yourself. Tell us about your family, where you've lived, what you do for a living, so we get to know each other a bit. And that starts this relationship building that Chris talked about, where you get to know more than just the few hours you spend together a month in a board meeting. And so to me, if you're going to be an effective governance team, you have to know each other. And so study sessions can be about that. And the thing that I always have to remind people of, especially in county boards, in county offices, is that the governance team should be involved in that. So don't leave the superintendent out. Make sure that the superintendent is there, because the superintendent is your best friend as a board member, because they can direct staff to do the things that you think are important, because the staff and the employees all work for the superintendent. As a county board member, you don't really have any employees. So you need to have that superintendent working with you in that. And also, I would say that another way to do study sessions is come to the annual education conference together, go to sessions together, go to lunch together or dinner together or both, and talk about what you're learning or thinking when you go to those. That's another kind of study session. But back to the original study session, it's an opportunity to really get to know each other and to not make decisions in the study session. They're typically for learning, but then they come back on a board for an agenda item. Masters in Governance is another good way to use as a study session. We encourage boards to come together as a study session. When I was a county superintendent, every time we had a new board, when Manny Scafani and Davis Campbell were doing them, I brought my whole county board to it. I went with them as well. We actually hosted it in my county office, which made it easy. And I had to translate, because MIG at that time was all about district boards, not about county boards. But I was there to help translate. And we got to have great talks, and when we had breaks for lunch, we got to talk and to know each other a little better. So MIG is also a way to get to know each other and build those relationships. And then I think the other thing for study sessions, and this is critical, and we found it with the board I'm on right now, it's so powerful. We conduct an annual board self-study, self-evaluation, and then we discuss it, either led by an outside facilitator from CSBA or by one of our own board members, and because it's focused on governance standards. And so it really focuses the conversation on, are we following the governance standards that are established by CSBA and that are shown to be effective? And are we getting common communication from the superintendent? So we're finding out if we're all experiencing our experiences as board members the same. So those are the three things: regular study sessions to get to know each other, AEC going to sessions together and eating together, Masters in Governance coming with each other to that, and then board self-evaluations coming to that together. Those are three study sessions I would recommend every board, including county boards, do each and every year.
I'm going to just simply say ditto. I agree. Christopher, where do you want to take that?
Well, Chuck covered a wide range of stuff, and it's great stuff. I agree with everything he said. So just a couple small notes. Anecdotally, it is not hard to have those conversations, to get to know each other. It's not difficult to build trust. Those things they're not difficult. They just take time, right? So if you have a goal in your life or in your district or in your county office of ed, I think there's a Mike Schmoker quote. Any goal you have, marry it to an obsession with funding and the calendar. When are you going to schedule those conversations? That's the whole, right? That's the thing. They don't happen serendipitously. They can, but why would you leave that to chance, right? So scheduling those conversations. I was in a district, it was a governance consulting. It was a Saturday morning somewhere in Central California. Everyone was tired. It was about 9 o'clock. We hadn't had enough coffee, and everyone looked a little tired. And in truth, I'm sure most of them were thinking, I'd much rather be home with my family right now than sitting in this room with 7 people and doing this. And I remember, I said, the team building stuff, like you said, Michael, it's got to be in the ethos of it. I just asked the question. So let's just go around the room. Just tell me your name, a little bit about your family, and then one thing you think probably nobody knows about you. And the most amazing thing happened. The very first person said, well, most of you probably don't know that I sing in a choir. I said, oh, that's really cool. The next person said, I didn't know you sing in a choir. I play the cello. I said, really? Yeah. And then we went around the circle. Everyone in the room was involved in music. And they did not know it. And I can tell you the tenor of that conversation dramatically shifted. And now they had this common thing. And you could feel the joy in them, like, oh, that's really cool. But it totally changed the conversation. And it gave them a commonality for future conversations, right? They always have this connection. So building those personal relationships is the beginning. And you can have a good relationship with anyone, regardless of your political stance, regardless of your policy ideas. You can have a good relationship with anyone. It just takes time and effort. Chuck said something I think is important, and that is, he mentioned the Masters in Governance program, and it's true that sometimes whole groups do attend. Masters in Governance is designed and intended for individual trustees. But as Chuck pointed out, if you're on a 5-member board and one person changes, that introduces 5 new relationships into the mix, right? So it's great for that individual to go to MIG and get up to speed fast, but you won't have coherence until that person comes back and shares with the team what they think they learned and check it with the understanding of the group. That's the coherence. So individual learning is a great way to get board members up to speed, but only in a study session do they have the time and the bandwidth to talk about what does that mean and how we practice it locally, because that's really where the rubber hits the road.
So one of the things I'm becoming clearer and clearer on is this notion of both of you are moving us away from just being in compliance. Compliance is like the minimum. This is what you must do. And this notion of study sessions, this notion of having conversations, all of those things, it's really interesting because I think that's where we start to move into transformation. And I know we're constantly talking about transforming education. So short explanations or short concepts, content that you want to add to this notion of transformation is where this starts to really take place. Because I know recently we're looking at the CASP scores, right? And we're edging along. I think that's compliance. What we're looking for is changing, as you described it earlier, Chuck. Like, how are we going to change education significantly? That's transformation. So I'd love for you to, can either of you connect all those deeper conversations with each other, add to trust, add to those things that lead to transformation in education? Or do I need to re-explain that? Can I let you guys just go?
I think you just gave us free license, and I'll let Chuck go first.
Yeah, I think that the thing about the way we do education as leaders is more about compliance than it is about transformation, unfortunately. And I think one of the things that has happened since 2013 is we have something called the Local Control and Accountability Plan that says you're no longer being compliant for the state. You're deciding what your community expects of you and what outcomes they expect of you. Now, I know at the county board, the LCAP is only about a few students that you serve. They're not about the special needs kids. They're about the court and community school kids mostly. However, if we keep thinking of that document and that planning as compliance, we're not going to make much difference, because I teach a course right now for doctoral students on reform, and reform comes from outside of our schools, and it says, you got to do this, you got to do this. And what's interesting is when you look at NAEP scores, which are the national scores over time, they have not changed. The gaps between Black kids and Hispanic kids and white kids and Asian kids have stayed as wide as they've ever been. Many of those reforms are about narrowing those gaps and helping kids achieve a lot more. It's not happening because it's compliance driven. What we need to do as board members is adopt a transformational mentality that says, to not that we have to come up with it as board members, but we turn it to our professional staff and say, what could be done differently that will make the differences that I know you want to see and that we want to see for our kids? And so there are ways of doing that, but it's not by trying to check the boxes off and be compliant to the Department of Education or to the legislature, whoever is telling us, but to actually work together with trust, respect, and coherence to create changes that maybe have not been thought of before, or have been thought of by a few, but haven't given permission to do. And as board members then ask for feedback, is that working? Is it doing what we wanted it to do? And if it is, fund it more and spread it further. But if it's not, change and try something else, because transformation doesn't happen with one try. Change doesn't happen with one try. It happens when you try things and you do iterations and you change and you try again and you collect data to see if it's working. And that's where the joy comes from, because then you see you're making a difference as opposed to just doing what people told you to do.
Got it. Love that. Christopher.
Yeah, I think there's a quote that says, California's never really embraced education reform. We just waved to it as it passed by. So the question of, I think Chuck's talking about giving, permission to fail. Try something new. And I think the board's leadership in that space is huge, right? So as Chuck said, change doesn't happen fast. So to me, the fundamental question is, do you have a theory of change? Do you know what the tactics are? Are you willing to invest in them? And have you identified the key indicators that will tell you you're on the right track? And how do we pivot and adjust if we're not on the right track? But educators, I had a cup of coffee recently with a former student I taught when she was in the 8th grade. I was like, I don't know, a couple decades ago, right? Brilliant young lady, doing great work in the world. That's sometimes how long we have to wait to find out the fruit of the labor. So, but to the extent that the board can give, support this creative freedom with intentionality and funding and clarity about what we're trying to change and what those key indicators are, and marking it and measuring it and pivoting when you need to. I agree with Chuck completely.
The only thing I want to add to that, because I know we have some new board members in the room, it doesn't mean you can ignore the law. So trainings in compliance keeps you out of jail. So don't ignore those things, but try to find the amount of places where things can change that don't violate the law.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you could say, so compliance is the floor, not the ceiling. Yes,
love that.
And now be creative.
Love that, because that really gives permission to go beyond. And I think that's the point of all this conversation, is really about this handbook as a way to just start you down that path, start you having those conversations, collectively understanding that we're going to create something. What is it that we're going to create? It's a collective process. I do have one question that, because we've been doing a pretty good job of answering all the questions and I've been monitoring the side here. So one of the questions, I think this is going to head towards Chuck, the extraordinaire. So be prepared, sir. We're going to see if we can stump you. Hello, and thank you for the handbook. Regarding the comment about the County Board of Education not having any staff, is there a law that would prohibit the county board from having staff? In other words, is there a statute that states that only the county superintendent can have staff?
Sort of. There are certain advisors county boards can hire, as I understand the code, for for example, for facilities where county boards have a certain amount of authority in facilities, the board can hire legal counsel or architects on facilities, things like that. But in essence, what the code says is that the majority of people that work in the county office are the employees of the county superintendent. And the rationale behind that is everybody needs one employer. If you have more than one employer, then you get multiple messages and you can't serve either of them. So the majority, because county offices were started as county superintendent of schools offices as a portion of county government, every county head had certain jobs. Well, the county superintendent's job was to run all the schools in the county. So they employed all the people that worked in the schools. They decided on their salaries. They decided who worked and who didn't work. And then county boards were brought in to give credentials because it became too big for an individual county superintendent to do. That was where county boards became important because they decided who were qualified teachers. They actually assessed the teachers and decided if they could teach properly, and they decided to give them a credential. Now, CTC has taken that job over, so that's no longer in county boards, but they've continued on with other responsibilities of oversight and transparency. So in essence, it'd be very limited people that could be hired by the county board, and they wouldn't actually be employees. They'd be independent contractors like attorneys or architects. That's
I'd love to, I'm going to add something to that as well. And I think one of the things I often did when I was consulting is I would explain to folks, you have to make a decision. You have staff and there's amount of time that they're expected to do work. How much time do you want them working with the board versus how much time you want them working with students and with those services? And I think that as a resource and being responsible for that resource as the board member, they weren't hired to come work for me. They were hired to do work in the county office and whatever those programs are. And I think it's more valuable to have them working in those places than to have them working with me. And I think there's a balance in there. That doesn't mean I don't need their attention every now and then, but it just means I want to be super careful with how often I'm taking their time away from the program that it's really going to help students. Again, it's the reason the book was built the way it was built. It's about the office, it's about the students, it's about the programs, funding, then it's about me. So anything you want to add to, okay, go ahead, Chuck. And
I'd add one thing. Remember, if there are 5 of you on the board, you don't want an individual to have 5 bosses. It's not fair. It doesn't work well. So everyone needs to have one person they report to. And so if a board member is giving directions to an employee and another board member is giving an opposite direction, that becomes very difficult on the board for the employee. So just keep that in mind. You should function as a board member as if you have no staff. And in a district, our only staff is the superintendent. So in a county, you don't even have that unless you're one of the 5 counties that appoints your superintendent. Actually,
I'll just add to that by saying I think one of the best definitions of governance I've heard, I believe it came from the European Economic Union. Governance is providing direction and oversight at a level above and removed from direct managerial control.
Say that once again. Say that.
Yeah, it's perfect, right. It's worth repeating. Governance is providing direction and oversight at a level above and removed from direct managerial control.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard it. We're going to go ahead. No, we're not going to wrap now, but we're going to start moving into it. That beautiful. I'm going to leave that right there. So here's what I want to do as we start to wrap up. Again, looking at the clock and how the conversation has been going really wonderfully. I love this. Final thoughts from each of you. Is there any one thing that you want to leave the audience thinking they're taking away from this using the governance handbook and how it can influence their work for years to come? Final thoughts. Go for it, Christopher.
Briefly, I would say, if you expect the system that you're governing to be one that embraces a culture of continuous learning, then the governing team has to embrace that culture. They have to model that behavior. Everybody in ed knows that one-shot deals don't change behavior. And so whatever learning you want to engage in, you've got to embed it somehow in the life of the work. Do you set aside 15 minutes at a board meeting to talk about what you learned in governance, whether you read an article or you went to a class, right? But just building into your agenda opportunities for learning. Because learning and being clear, I would say being clear about what learning will get you. Right. So I heard this great, I'd like to hear Chuck's take on this, that professional development means willing to place yourself on the edge of your professional discomfort to change a behavior, whether that's a mental behavior, a moral behavior, facial behavior, whatever it is, right? But the purpose of the learning is to change something to do it better, because no one wants to give money to a teacher to go to a conference for a day and come back and do what they did the day before. So what was the value, right? So what is it you want? What is the behavior you want to change, and embedding that in the daily life of the work? I think having those conversations is where they learn.
Thank you.
I agree with that completely. And what I would say is anybody who wants to do a job well should want to learn every day. I've been working in education for over 50 years. I learn something every day, and that's what keeps me alive. And then I share that with others. Being a county board member is a difficult position. There are legal differences in authorities, roles, and responsibilities between county boards and county superintendents, and yet you must work together. And you can either make that work for you and work for your community and for your county, or you can fight about it. The governance handbook should help you, because it's supported by CSBA, to value learning, as Chris said, and value your own professional development, and provide guidance to move your county governance team forward to do great things. You should want to be joyful in your job as a county board member and make a difference in your community, have a positive impact on the students, their families, the other educational institutions, the residents of your county, and the businesses in your county. If you pay attention to your governance team and how you can work together effectively, you can make a huge difference in your county, and you can sleep well at night knowing that what you're doing is making a huge difference. So I hope you'll continue to develop professionally and to come to CSBA sessions so that you can learn more and become the very best governance team you can become.
Perfect. Well stated. So I am going to say that my board is going to start using the governance handbook in study sessions, which I had to leverage them for like 30 seconds, and they just figured, they've gotten to know me over the years, and they know that if once I get started, I'm not going to let them go, and so they just shorten the conversation and just say, yeah, we'll do it if you'll stop bugging us. And we have great conversations. It's been fantastic every time we followed the advice and we've made time for those conversations. Again, team building doesn't happen because you have an activity that's team building. Team building is the actual conversations outside of the work. How are we going to be with each other while we are doing the work we're being asked to do? So my board's going to start doing that. We're going to have study sessions. And so it's a great way to start to inform policy development, what it is for how we support our districts, all the above. And I'd also love to hear from any of you that either you have already begun having study sessions, you've begun having conversations about the handbook, or you're now committed to doing that before our next get together, which will be, I'll talk about that in a moment. So again, the idea that we're looking forward to hear from anyone who's had an experience already using the handbook, or you're about to start committing to using the handbook. So here's what I want to do for today. That's it, our webinar. I want to thank our guests, Dr. Chuck Weiss and Christopher Maricle, both of you extraordinary practitioners and knowledgeable folks. Can't imagine two better people to start this series with. Again, mark your calendars for February 18th. And if you aren't registered for all those rest of those, then again, you want to go ahead and register. CSBA.org/webinars is where you'll find the webinar, so you can go ahead and be committed to the rest. Also, you'll see here in front of you the AEC County Board Breakfast, December 4th, 7:30 a.m. Listen, we have two students that are going to come join us for a panel that morning. It's about foster care. And the fact that two students are going to get up that early, look, I was in high school. I never tried to, I did my best not to get up that early. I'm old now and I still try not to get up that early. It's auto now. It just happens. So again, that breakfast will be December 4th, 7:30 a.m. The second handbook webinar, again, February 18th. Christopher and Chuck both talked a lot about the MIG. The first county MIG will be happening March 10th. That'll be the next cohort, and that'll be session 1 of 4. And that'll be happening in San Diego at the Sheraton Resort, the San Diego Sheraton Resort across from the airport. And we'll stay there for the 11th and the 12th with the County Governance Workshop, which will be focused on foster and homeless youth and all those, again, the services that we are expected to coordinate. So we got a lot of folks who are lined up for that. We're excited. And then if you happen to have a little extra time, you're welcome to join us at the Coast to Coast Federal Advocacy, April 13th through 15th in Washington, D.C. And so I'm going to double check my notes, but ladies and gentlemen, I think that was everything that I wanted to cover. So a final thank you to my guests. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us for today, but not just that, but for all that you have signed on to do for others. I want to end it with this. Remember that to lead people, you love them. To save people, you serve them. Ladies and gentlemen, see you soon. And hopefully it's at the AEC in Sacramento. Thanks a lot.